Thank you so much. Bring you greetings from California Baptist University and Redeemer Baptist Church. We're really happy to be able to be here with you today. And I know that we enjoy, both entities that I'm a part of, enjoy sending our students to you and enjoy the product that we get. Redeemer, we really enjoy doing it because they get to stay at Redeemer. But we very much enjoy you being here. This particular text is fascinating to me, and I thought really timely to some degree, because we're turning the corner to the holidays. Not only do we have just the internal conflict, though, that Dr. Ward referenced, but the holidays are particularly an acute time for this particular ideology to come up. Chestnuts roasting on an open fire, Jack Frost nipping at your nose, Yuletide songs being sung by fire, folks dressed up like Eskimos, except for in California. And that kind of thing is always a part of what we think about when we think of Christmas. Christmas is a time of comfort, a time of internal peace, gathering with family, and this is when people love a little bit easier and embrace the world around them just a little bit more. Well, this is really fascinating because that doesn't actually seem to be why Jesus came. And so this text today really highlights this. Let me read, I'm going to read both the Matthew and the Luke passage just real quickly. Matthew 10, 34 through 39 reads as follows. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I've not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I've come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those in his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Parallel passage in Luke chapter 12, verse 49 through 53 starts like this. I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it's accomplished. Do you think that I've come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on, in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. The text here suggests that there is a heavy price to pay when following the Prince of Peace. The most obvious problem that crops up when reading a text like this is, whoa. Wait a minute. I thought angels show up to the shepherds and they say, at least on Charlie Brown, right? Behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy. This day is a day that I bring peace to all the earth, a peace on all men of goodwill. I mean, this is part of it, right? I mean, not only is peace just a common human aspiration, but it actually seems to be in the Bible. Isaiah 9, Zechariah 7, all look forward to that eschatological day in the future when the Messiah comes and what will mark his reign. Peace. And yet this says that he didn't come to bring peace. Or Isaiah chapter 11, verse 6 through 9, that define the characteristic markers of the Messiah's eschatological rule. And right in the heart of that is peace. Jesus even conquers later on through quiet acceptance of unjust accusations in Matthew 26 and 27. Even his people conquer in Revelation, not by war or by aggression, but by giving their own lives. Peace. What can this possibly mean? Paul even notes that Jesus came specifically to make peace between God and man. This peace is not idealistic, and so it doesn't preclude the kind of talk that Jesus is giving right now. It doesn't preclude war between nations. It doesn't preclude conflict between believers and unbelievers, or the persecution of Christians, which is the canvas upon which most of the New Testament, if not all of the New Testament, is written. Jesus did come as Prince of Peace, no doubt. But this highlights a certain type of peace that he's talking about that happens when one kingdom is toppled by another, when one line of loyalty is subverted by another line of loyalty. I came up with this idea as to what bringing the sword means, and you'll have to excuse me, it's almost like a first-year seminary student. I learned a new word this week. That doesn't happen to me a lot, but I learned a new word, and so I was like, this is like the best word and most providential word ever, and so you probably already know it, but this is what you jot down just down in your notes. What does it mean for Jesus to bring a sword? Here it is. It means he is potentate. I knew that word. Potentate, not potentiator. Potentate, not potentiator. Potentate is just, it sounds like a word from, I grew up in Alabama. It sounds like a word we would use for something that we might eat. But it's really a word for king or sovereign. But potentiator is the word I just learned. A potentiator is a chemical or a drug of some sort that enhances the effects of another drug. So, for example, grapefruit juice, and I do not know this by experience, I heard this. Grapefruit juice is a potentiator for OxyContin. The effects of OxyContin are elaborated, enhanced by grapefruit juice. I know that. I think that's the way that most people look at Jesus. Jesus is looked at as potentiator. I have a life. It's good, it's moral, it's religious. Perhaps it's deeply American, perhaps it's not. And Jesus enhances that. Jesus enhances my life. He makes all the good things better. He makes all the bad things a little easier to deal with. Jesus as potentiator is nowhere in the New Testament. Jesus' potentiator, as far as I could tell, is everywhere on today's pop shelves. If you don't believe me, stroll to your nearest Barnes & Nobles and go to the religion section. And it is awash with Jesus as potentiator. Whether it's acknowledging you to wash your face, not apologize, or live your best life now, this is all driven by the idea that Jesus is the thing that enhances your life. But Jesus is not the thing that enhances your life. Jesus is king. Jesus is king. Kings don't come to enhance your life. Kings come to rule. I think it's a really difficult idea for people in the United States. But this is exactly what this means. Right here in Matthew 10, verse 35, for example, Jesus claims that he has actually come, and his coming will set a man against his father, daughter against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's own enemies will be in his household. Luke chapter 12, the division that comes to the home of future believers. It derives from this judgment on the earth, this death of Christ that he talks about, we'll talk about later. Jesus comes as king. See, what a king does, kings do one of two things. They either conquer you or they demand your loyalty. They kill you, rather, demand your loyalty. Those are your only two options with a king. You either fight the king, go to war against the king, or you bow the knee to the king. And when a king comes and he crafts a kingdom, he crafts the kingdom with his own values. And those values are not up for options. These are the values of the kingdom. These are the motivations of the kingdom. These are the ambitions of the kingdom. These are the goals of the kingdom. And kings do this, and they do this without any hint towards parity between them and anyone else. When Jesus says he comes to bring a sword, it's not that he comes to do violence or comes to even encourage violence. It's that he understands and knows that when a king takes the throne, that he dethrones all other kings. And people who bow the knee to Jesus will do so in the midst of other kingdoms, always, for the rest of their lives. We like to think about this, I think, in terms of first century, Well, first century, you have first century Palestinian Judaism, where the vast majority of early persecution came for believers. Stephen, James, John the Baptist, Jesus himself. First century Judaism in Rome then began to get momentum going and hated the Christians as well. In fact, Julian the Apostate wanted to kill Christians so badly that he wrote a letter to his commander and he said, we want to kill the Christians, but we can't because they take care of their poor and ours. It's politically not advantageous to kill them, but I really want to kill them. Christians were in the crosshairs. In fact, there was so much in the crosshairs that Mark Furtado wrote a series of lectures called Why on Earth Would Anybody Become a Christian in the First 3 Centuries? And his point is to try to highlight the distinctions that these people faced over against people like us. I grew up in Alabama. If you wanted to win the sheriff election, you had to be a member of a church. Now, that might be opposite out here, but in Alabama, that was the way that you moved up the ladder, whether it was on the school board or in local jurisprudence, but not in the first 3 centuries of the church. There was no prestige. There was no advantage at all to following Jesus. You lost everything. That's what the sword is here. That's what division is here. You see that the division comes at the closest, most familial places. Father, mother, son, daughter, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law in particular, who would have had a very tight relationship. You see that really personified in the book of Ruth. No, the Prince of Peace is a king. And the king comes with his own agenda and his own values. He is not potentiator. You know, just for a group of people like yourself who probably are very active in your local church or people who are going into the ministry, Jesus as potentiator is probably one of the easiest things to let slide because it sounds so good. Jesus as almost like a condiment who makes your life better. But Jesus is, in fact, none of those things. And to treat Jesus like that is idolatrous. Seeing Jesus as preeminently king, whom you follow, whom has waged war on death and sin and has rescued you, liberated you, motivated out of his great love for you, driving you into the world with a liberating gospel that frees all who call upon his name. That's the only way really to think about Jesus. Thinking about him as a potentiator, as one who just simply enhances life. Well, that doesn't really bring a sword. Because if you think about it, you can adjust that over and over and over again until there's no real distinction between what you say about Jesus and maybe what you say about your country or your political party or your ethnicity. Jesus' potentiator is the opposite of what he is. He's king. And because he's king, second point here, we say that Christians must let go of all other allegiances. Jesus reveals that to follow him is to follow another king, another kingdom, another values, all other identities and goals and missions. The new king and kingdom not only provide a new way of salvation, they craft cultural narratives that are hostile to the cultural narratives integral to one's home. Have you ever asked when reading that text, what would it be that would pit father against son or daughter against mother? Daughter-in-law against mother-in-law might be understandable in your situation. I don't know, but you have to ask the question, don't you? What crafts that? Well, it's not policy. You know, new Christians don't say, well, now I'm going to begin fashioning in my life another Roman policy against Roman policy. It's not so much that. It carries over into that. Particularly after Rome began, the leaders in Rome began, requiring that people only pray to them, right? And they refer to them as Lord alone and things like this. Christians couldn't do that. So in that sense, it's policy. But what it really did was it recrafted cultural narratives. Cultural narratives are huge. I'm keenly aware of cultural narratives because I'm from the South. And whenever anyone from the South is portrayed on a television show or in the movies, we always, we're married to our sister. Our vocabulary is just slightly larger than the number of teeth we have in our mouth. It's just, we're always that guy. And I probably resent it because I might be related to people like that. But regardless, that's a cultural narrative. Here, there's a new cultural narrative in the New Testament. Jesus has torn down the wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile. I don't think we really, if 2020 should have taught us anything, it should have asked us to go back and look at the scriptures and ask the question, who are the people of God in the New Testament? See, in the Old Testament, the people of God, this is an easy answer on a quiz. Who are the elect in the Old Testament? If you're in Dr. Mooney's Old Testament survey class, this is good. You look at the tip of the pencil, go, Israel. Exactly. Fantastic. Who are they there in the New Testament? Supra-ethnic. John looks in Revelation 5, and there's thousands, myriads upon myriads of people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. You'll notice that he doesn't lose the tribe, tongue, and nation part. Whatever has happened to them, their identity culturally and ethnically is not effaced. He still notices every tribe, tongue, and nation, but they are united, one with one another around the Lamb. This is the whole logic. There is no Jew and Greek. There is no slave or free. There is no male or female. You don't lose those sources of identity, but they're all subverted to this new reality. Here's the new cultural narrative. I'm a Jewish kid. I become a Christian, and I look over at a Gentile or a Greek or a Roman kid, and he's brother. She's sister. That's a no starter in Jewish life in the first century. Here's a group of people who serve a king that they can't see except in each other. What cultural narratives craft you? How do you see other people? Are your cultural narratives primarily given to you by Fox News or CNN? Are your cultural narratives crafted to you by the way that you were raised? Or are your cultural narratives driven irrevocably by the gospel of Jesus? So that you are captured, and without need or desire to see things in any other way than the way that your king has delivered them. This is the reality that became definitive for the early church. They became bound to one another. In fact, it's not without problems. I mean, obviously, if you've taken a New Testament survey class and you've read Corinthians, I don't care how bad off your church is, Corinthians should make you feel better. It's extraordinary. It's like you read Corinthians. I remember reading Corinthians the first time I was at Beeson Divinity School, and I don't know that I'd ever actually read it before. My bachelor's degree is in jazz piano performance, and so I wasn't a Christian in college and just became a Christian at the latter part of college, and so I was new to the whole theology and Bible thing, but I remember reading that thinking, how did these people make the cut to get in the Bible? Is there something they didn't do? I mean, you read through 1 Corinthians 5, they've got this situation with a guy and his stuff. It's like this first century Jerry Springer stuff, and it just goes on. It just keeps getting worse, and then they've got this massive class distinction that they seem to. I was like, this is horrible. I was in a really lousy church at the time, but I felt way better about it after I got done with Corinthians. It wasn't without problems that they engaged these new cultural narratives. But these narratives alleviated them of all other allegiances. All the things have you thought about that? What would this have been like? I mean, this would have been saying goodbye to things like identity and future and family, possible marriage, job, occupations and security, and all the things that would render significant vulnerability. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. This is incredible. And before you, please don't get caught up in the sort of the nonsensical dichotomy of Christian and disciple. I know that was a big deal in the 80s out here. I don't know that it's still here anymore. But there's no such thing as a kind of a two-stage Christian life. It was in Antioch. If you remember the book of Acts, it was in Antioch. The disciples were first called Christians. Christian and disciple are the same thing. Jesus is saying, this is how worthy I am. See, it's not that Jesus is not acting out on some desperate, sort of need for postmodern affirmation, to be recognized as important. He's king. Kings deserve and demand allegiance, sole allegiance. But what's really remarkable is the type of king he is. So the type of king he is what makes him altogether greater. One writer was commenting on, I think the original discussion in the book was, he was commenting on how Tolkien had written this essay for Lewis on fairy stories to try to convey to Lewis that the world was this enchanted place, remarkable place. And we know that as human beings. That's why we keep on telling each other these stories. And the writer that was reading elaborated on that and said, this is why we tell each other stories about superheroes and Greek gods and things like that. Just think about it. Think about it. We tell each other stories about these beings who are equal in both virtue and physical strength. And they rule from that vantage point. And then he said something really profound that I hadn't thought of up until the time that he said it. He goes, it's amazing that we tell each other stories like that because no one has ever experienced that politically. No one in the history of the world has ever experienced that. Someone who was equally as virtuous as they were powerful. People from my generation might want to suggest Reagan, I guess. I loved Reagan too, but I didn't love him then, but I like the memory of him now. But that idea is certainly not applicable to Reagan. There is no human experience of that, yet we know it's out there. Here it is. Here it is. Jesus in Ephesians chapter 1 is the absolute sovereign over the universe, over the cosmos. Jesus in Colossians 1 is the head of all things. In Matthew 28, he's the one who all authority in heaven and on earth is given. And he is equally as virtuous as he is powerful. Listen to this text in Luke 12, our text. I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it's accomplished. Multiple commentaries on this. Really odd passage. Came down on this idea that Jesus was saying that God's plan is for salvation that involves judgment, but a judgment that the Messiah himself will bear for others, not one he will inflict on others. Leon Morris noted, it's not an attractive prospect, but Jesus longs for it to come, for only so can the saving work be accomplished. He goes on to the thought of the cross as a baptism, just like he does in places like Mark 10. Jesus says, I came to cast fire on the earth. I came to judge the earth, but the judgment will actually fall on me. This is the kind of king he is. A king who is Prince of Peace, who brings a sword. To follow this king is a heavy price. How is it a heavy price? Because to follow this king, you must alleviate yourself of all other allegiances. And you do that by embracing cultural narratives that are driven by the gospel themselves. And these cultural narratives inevitably had to do with people, like we just were saying. But it was all driven by this kind of king. There was a movie in Sundance Film Festivals called 3 Seasons. It was in the Sundance Film Festival, so I wouldn't dial it up on Netflix for family movie night with the kids. But I was reading a guy who was talking about a review of this, I think, in the New York Times. And the movie itself is really fascinating. It's about post-Vietnam War, Vietnam, 1970s. And it follows these 4 vignettes through this post-war life in Vietnam. And one of the particular vignettes are about a prostitute named Lon and a cyclo driver named Hi. Cyclos, if you've never been over in that part of the world, are like little taxis, but they're hooked up to bicycles. You sit in the back and you pay people to kind of take you around town. And Hi is a cyclo driver. And Hi and Lon have this one thing in common. They are people with massively unfulfilled desires. Hi is in love with Lon. He thinks she's the most beautiful woman in the world, but he can't afford her. Lon longs to live the life of the people that are in these hotels that she has to go and service. But she never does. And she works, the harder she works to try to get out of the life of prostitution, the more damage she incurs. In the middle of the movie, there's a cyclo race that's put out and for all the drivers to gather in the center of town. And Hi goes and he enters the race. And lo and behold, he wins the race. And he wins all this amount of money, this great amount of money. And he's, for the first time in his life, has more money than he's ever had in his life. And you know what he does with it? He blows it all on one night in this remarkable hotel. And he pays Lon's price. And he says, I want to see you in that hotel room. And of course, if you're watching the movie and this is a Sundance Film Festival movie, you should expect that there to be this seedy sex scene that sort of is on its way. Lon certainly expects that as a character. But then the essay about the movie says, this is where the movie is fascinating. Because Hi, when he gets to the room, says to her, I don't want to have sex with you. I only want for you to be comfortable. I want to watch you fall asleep. And I'll leave you alone. And that's exactly what he does. She eventually falls asleep. And she wakes up the next day and he's gone. The essay said, at this point, something in Lon snaps. And the reason it snaps is not because she finally gets to stay in this nice, cushy room, but the reason it snaps is because for the very first time in her life, someone with power over her exercised it for her good, exercised it to serve her and love her. And you can never, the writer said this is a secular writer, you can never be the same after the grace of selfless love. Isn't it amazing? And they're right. See, that's what kind of king this is. When we begin talking about Jesus dying for us, we're talking about the sovereign of the universe, the Alpha, the Omega, the one who is the beginning and end, the creator of all things, king of the universe, judge of all the earth, the one to whom all authority in heaven and earth is given, sits at the right hand of the Father in authority. And with all of this power, he chooses to use it to serve people like us. If you want to know what drives first century and what should drive 21st century loyalty to Jesus, so that in some very real way, the cultural narratives that we cling to provide to be offensive to those around us, it's because no one has ever loved you like this except Jesus. No one has ever loved you like this except Jesus. Jesus earns the right to demand your loyalty. I was thinking about how to walk away from this text together. We have the Prince of Peace coming to fulfill the hopes of Israel, and in doing so, does so as the King of all the earth, which is hoped for in the Old Testament. I mean, the entire theology of Psalms is all about, the God coming or God installing his king on his holy mountain. Psalm 2 just rides all the way to the end to where let everything that has breath praise the Lord. And 150 is the celebration of that one thing happening. If you're interested, if you've never picked up Stephen Dempster's Dominion and Dynasty, you should do that just for his chapter on the Psalms. because it provides this idea that there's coming a king. And at the very core of this king's reign is peace, but it's peace between you and God. And it's peace between you and all other people who bow the knee to this king. But the kings of the earth take their stand against the Lord and against his anointed one in Psalm 2. And they rage. And this is exactly what's to be had. Earlier in Matthew, Jesus notes that as people have treated him, so they'll treat you. And so in thinking about how to walk away from this, I was thinking, how do we walk away from this? Because we live posh lives. We live comfortable lives. We don't live lives that are threatened by persecution. How do we do this? I think there's a couple of things. First of all, to ask ourselves the question, do people treat me in the same way that they treat Jesus? So, for example, you probably don't know anyone that just hates Jesus. I mean, unless you're from like an Orthodox Jewish family, and frankly, none of you look Jewish. But I mean, if in fact you were, then you would probably know somebody. You might know somebody that really hated Jesus. But most of us, you're probably just like me, a bunch of Irish people. They don't hate Jesus. They don't really love him. They don't really care. And so my question is that the way they treat me? If they look at Jesus and go, then they're supposed to be doing that to me. If I'm following the king, then I need to look like the king. The second thing is this. Are you willing to be a traitor to everything else other than Jesus? Father, mother, son, daughter, in-laws, ethnicity, political party, country? Are you willing to be a traitor to everything else other than Jesus? Because this text does not give you any room to not be a traitor to everything else but Jesus. And this text doesn't tell you you've got to be. It doesn't say go out and try to be irritating to your father, your mother, your mother-in-law. My mother-in-law might say that I'm already way ahead of the scale on this particular passage. But it does say, are you willing? Are you willing to be a traitor? When you bow the knee to a king, the king is the only one to whom you bow the knee. Are you willing to be a traitor to everything else? Have you ever thought about what that means? Ever thought about what that would cost? I don't know about you, but when I first started thinking about these things, which was just a few years ago, actually, before 2020, actually, God just providentially sort of moved me into a place where I began thinking about this, particularly this notion of identity. And this is what drives Redeemer, is this concept of identity and mission, identity and mission. And I began thinking, what does that cost? I began paying really close attention to the persecuted church, watching all that they pay to be Christians, and asking myself the question, what have I paid? What does it cost me to follow Jesus? I'm not really interested in being a jerk and just in the name of Jesus. That's not, nobody's doing that. What does it cost me? How is it that I'm so connected to Jesus that everything that everyone responds to, when they hear Jesus, they respond to me the same way? Is that happening? Those are great questions. Because the Prince of Peace came to bring a sword. He came to bring division. And the reason is because he came to rescue hearts and arrest them and own their loyalties and their love, because no one had ever loved them the way he had. I pray that your ministry would be defined by this element. Defined by a sense of identity, defined by a sense of mission, defined by a strong sense of the gospel arresting you and drawing your allegiances out solely to Christ. Let's pray. Father, in the name of Jesus, I pray that you would give us grace to love you deeply. And I pray that the gospel will continually, daily, arrest our hearts and minds and command our allegiances and our affections. And I pray that you would do this, Father, for your own great glory and for our joy as well. In the name of Christ, amen.